Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those, as we found out the other day, pertains to invasive species. In my previous video I talked about 7 invasive species that America gave to Britain. Well, now it's time to turn the tables and talk about 7 invasive species that Britain, as in Greater Europe, gave to the United States of America. And there's a reason that I've expanded this one to include wider Europe, and that's because, good documentation doesn't exist for some of these species. And that's because every single source that I read said that this thing came here via European settlers. So I think we're just going to have to go with it and just assume that some of them were British. And so without further bamboo, let's take a look at 7 invasive species that Britain/Europe gave to the United States. Poison hemlock. It might sound like a wrestling move performed by Sting, the wrestler, not the singer, but it's actually a plant, and an attractive plant at that. That's actually why it was brought to the United States via Europe, except, and the name is a giveaway, it's poisonous, specifically to farm animals, and Alice Cooper. Now, you're not likely to have this growing in your house unless you live in an irrigation ditch, which, happens to all of us at some point or other. But it is that sort of plant that you find by the side of the road or in, wasteland areas. Basically, it's best to stay away from it all round, and the same is true of our next entry, particularly if you're a plant. Different plant, similar story. English ivy was brought to the United States via I don't know which country. It's hard to fathom. It's not like it's in the name. I mean, what does ivy mean, right? It's not the same as ivory. It's not the Ivory Coast. So, English, right? Yes. Although I can't find in any of the records any sort of indication that it specifically came from England. It's just that America has come to refer to it as English ivy. There's just assumptions being made, and it probably did come from England. It's pretty amazing, really. I mean, it has the capacity to grow 100 feet vertically, like Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. But he was one of the good guys. Ivy is not a good guy. If anything, it's more like Galactus, right? Because not only does it grow really tall, it devours entire planets or, just sort of environments. So it chokes out other plant life and creates this sort of overgrowth that's known as ivy desert. Is it what? Desert, ivy desert. Sorry, I must have desserts on the brain. That happens to you when you quarantine for this long. When this is all over, imagine all of the other curves that I'm going to have to flatten. What's that? Stressed backwards is desserts. I rest my case, Your Honour. For now, let's move on from talking about the things that I'm about to eat and talk about the things that I used to eat as a kid. Dandelions! Raise your hand if you've never eaten a dandelion. That would be everybody but me. Great. So anyway, so in England, they're everywhere, right? They're all over every school field, except the patch that I used to frequent. And they were seen as quite a prominent flower during the reign of Henry VIII. And we just sort of loved them as a flower. We loved them so much that we probably sent them to America via the Mayflower. Word on the street is they didn't bring them here because they're yellow and attractive. They brought them here because of their medicinal qualities. And now you know how I've lived so long. That's not backed by science. Don't eat dandelions.
You can make tea out of dandelions.
You can make tea out of dandelions. That was not Google, that was Tara. So yeah, the Pilgrims brought dandelions to the United States, although they rudely forgot pork pies. So initially they planted these dandelions all across New England. However, like viruses and stupidity, they spread very quickly. Dandelion seeds were windswept across the United States, and the landscape was changed forever. And that's bad because, and I found this one article from the Science Daily that said, dandelions are troublesome weeds that are detested by most gardeners. And now I'm just picturing angry people in local newspapers. So with that, let's move on to our next entry. Gorse. There must be something about yellow petals that us Europeans like to inflict on other people. As a kid, I remember wiping a buttercup onto the forehead of a girl called Julie. But it's difficult, to track down a backstory of gorse, mainly because Google thinks I've misspelled horse. Plenty of articles on those, but it looks like gorse was introduced to the United States via Europeans, don't know which breed, in the early 1800s. Now, given its prominence in Great Britain, it looks like my home country might be a chief suspect. Thankfully, though, I do feel some comfort in knowing that it hasn't conquered all of the United States, just the west coast, mainly Oregon and California. But it is an invasive species, mostly due to its aggressive seed dispersal, so a bit like Mick Jagger. And if you're watching Mick, I'm a big fan of the role. He's not watching. Anyway, while we are on the subject of bands from the 1960s, that brings us on very neatly to the birds. It's a different spelling. Unpopular opinion. I absolutely love pigeons. I think they're adorable, aren't they? The way they walk around doing this all day, every day. That it looks like an embarrassing sex move. I won't do that again. And pigeons, of course, are everywhere in Britain, right? So you'd think that we are definitely the culprits here. But for once, this is definitely not Britain's fault, because the rock pigeon, or technically the rock dove, because pigeons are doves, was introduced to North America in 1606 by the French, right, in Nova Scotia, Canada. So I'm washing my hands of this. Actually, no, that's causing a lot of dryness at the minute. But you get the point. This is between the French, the Canadians, the French Canadians, and America. Either way, in the ensuing decades, pigeons did make their way to American towns, cities, and the Dunkin' Donuts on Clark Street. And they're just everywhere now, right? So that's the fault of the French, and I won't be blamed for this. I can't be blamed for any of these. I wasn't alive. But, and this sort of bears out my love for them, right? They're not particularly destructive, right? They just go for your French fries and in your hair. Other than that, they're a pretty placid bird, unlike our next entry. We've all heard the saying, bloody swans, right? That's probably one I made up myself, sorry. But swans they're new to the United States. I mean, relatively new. They came to the US in the late 1880s. Before then, this country was swanless, which sounds a little bit like Swan Lake. And that was, composed by Tchaikovsky, who was a Russian, which is appropriate given that swans mostly occupy, at least in a native sense, the former Soviet Union. So it's quite possible that America's swan population is not just some elegant waterfowl, but tiny remote-controlled reconnaissance boats. Now, there is a small chance that the United Kingdom could take credit too, because we have 22,000 of the little buggers. But with this one, the full backstory is not known, unlike our final entry. You'll be very pleased to know that these birds did not come here with the Soviet swans. They're called Starlings, not Stalin. But their introduction to America was influenced by another bearded poet. That's to suggest that Stalin was himself a bearded poet, and he was. The things you find out when you're on quarantine. Let me break this down for you, right? So it's reported that the president of the American Acclimatization Society, Eugene Schieffelin, wanted to bring to America every bird referenced in the entire works of Shakespeare, presumably as an excuse to use the phrase, free as a bard. And that's where, through the lens of history, we're looking back going, no, Eugene, don't do that. Oh, you've done it. He released 60 birds in New York City in about 1890. And then they multiplied, because they're birds, right? And they became 150 million of them. Now, in the comments section under the last video, a lot of people said that they came from England, but I couldn't really find any evidence of that. They came generally from Europe, but what I do know is that Eugene here was American. So unfortunately, it was one of your lot who let this idea, how can I put this, spread its wings, though they probably did come from England. So you've got 150 million starlings in the United States. They tend to fly in huge packs, right? I don't know the collective term, so do excuse me. And this is a big problem for aircraft, okay? Just ask the passengers of a downed flight in Boston in 1960. You can't, they all died. That was unexpectedly grim. The point is, starlings are bastards. A bit like Starling, right? And they eat all of the olives, which, somebody has to be fair. But they also eat grapes and tomatoes, and in total, they cause about $800 million worth of agricultural damage in America every year. So on behalf of Shakespeare fans everywhere, I'm truly, truly sorry. And that's an exact sentence I once said to my dad, but for different reasons. That's it for this episode. Thank you for joining me. Let me know in the comments below your favourite European invasive species. And if you haven't had the chance to do so, follow me on Twitter, where I talk about everything from animals to British versus American food to communist swans. And you can do that by following me at Lost in the Pond US. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that my videos don't get lost in the pond with said swans. And a big shout out to all of my patrons who make these videos possible. Without you, especially during during these quarantined times, I don't know where I'd be. I'd be here. There's nowhere else to go. But if you would like to support this channel, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Anybody that does support us will get access to our secret live stream, and those of you who pledge $5 or more a month will get access to not only that, but my secret podcast. So go there now. It takes about 5 minutes to sign up, and don't forget to watch the welcome video. That's it. Take care. I'll see you soon. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.